Thank you.
Phenomenal. All right. So thank you very much for having me. It's great to be back in this hyper-cultural community of ours. I wish I could be there in person maybe next time. So we'll be closing up tonight. I'll try to keep my remarks relatively brief, but the puzzle that I'm working on is why is it with all these good intents around supporting employee well-being and diversity at work, it's been so difficult to make positive progress. And so we'll spend the next few minutes with a little bit of a looking back over the history, some of the things that I think might be common and could be done differently. And then I'd love it if we have a few minutes, if we could have a spirited conversation around some of these thoughts. So basically the visuals, I think, sort of summarize how I think things have been in both of these topics. You know, we've all known that we are humans at work. I work at Harvard Business School. We write about people like robots, managing robots. So we have really under-indexed for humanity, even in business schools, even in families. We pretended not to know what was going on. Same thing with racism. If we ignored it, it would go away. Then there was a shock of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, where suddenly there was a reaction, a lot of looking in the rearview mirror, saying, what is it that we do?
Carin, can you hear us? Sorry.
Yes.
We're not seeing the full presentation, so we wanted you to see if you could fix it. I need to hear that display settings. Switch the display settings. Yes.
I apologize. I didn't, the sharing is not working. Is that?
No, you have it in presentation mode. You have to switch to the display settings.
Aha, so that I do not know. So you just see the next one, right? Or as we go along?
Yeah, it's good now.
It's good now.
It's good now? Fantastic. All right.
Thank you.
So, you know, a lot of then tilting at windmills, and I think there are a couple of other dials that we can do. When I was been working on this research, you know, the words of my daughter sort of came back into my mind. One day I was called aside when I picked her up at daycare, and the daycare teacher said, you know, I had this conversation with your daughter. She wasn't sharing her toys. And I said, okay, well, what did my daughter say? And they said, well, you know, we explained that sharing is caring. And basically my kid said, I know, but I don't care. And so we had a conversation with her at night about sort of the cost that this would impose on her socially if she were not to care. And she says, I will care if I know that it will bring me something back or if I'm scared. And these words have been sort of ringing around my head as we go along, you know, because fundamentally, both driving mental health and diversity at work is about sharing. Fundamentally, it's sharing resources, it's sharing workspaces, and we need to care in order to do that. And I think there have been a lot of factors that have made it really difficult for people to care. You know, the scaffolding for inclusion has been around for decades, you know, and so we have the legal protections that hasn't been the issue. In the area of employee well-being, which is what we wrote a book about, you know, basically for over 100 years, companies have tried to drive mental health and support at work. Some of the programs around, like the session that we just had, have become increasingly popular in the past few years. But really, you know, even in the late 19th century, we had sort of so-called social secretaries whose job it was at the time to help people with substance abuse. Sorry, that is the cat's not sharing. You know, and so for 100 years, you've seen sort of companies do a bunch of things, and really very, very little has worked. More recently, in the past 4 years, you've seen companies react to the murder of George Floyd and the mental health crisis in very much the same way. So what happens is that, you know, something that has been visible all along bursts onto the scenes, and corporations need to say something. And the word corporation here I use in terms of also our academic institutions, you know, quick, just say something. And so we tend to just say what everybody else is saying to make sure that it's okay. Tend to make promises because that's what people do in panics. So we've seen, you know, the similarities. Then the second thing is that, well, we can't just say something, we've got to do something. And so the doing here is not reflecting necessarily in how we got here. It's, okay, we're here, so how are we going to sort of bandage the wound, right? Our patient, be it our reputation, our companies are kind of like in the ER. What do you do? We hire consultants. There's been a lot of money spent on DI and wellness programs. But then we also tell employees, we want you to take care of yourself. We want you to play nice with each other. And we tell them, if things sort of get rough, you can take time off. We send people to self-care seminars and also to diversity training. It takes time out of our workdays, but then we're still expected to do the same thing. Both of these areas also, we've seen a lot of recruitment, being in chief people officers, diversity officers, wellness officers to drive the broader inclusion agenda. All of this sort of occurs tangentially to the way that the work gets done in organizations. So I think it's led to a break in trust for the employees, and there's been a lot of memes around this, around wellness, which is, I want you to do yoga, but then I want you to just work as hard as you used to. So we're seeing this sort of lack of trust, companies and leaders going through the motions, and this has led to an increasing cynicism and I think increasingly worse metrics. One of the great puzzles, I think, for those of us who are interested in well-being and employee engagement is that no matter what we do, it's kind of stayed at the same level, for 20 years. So on the one hand, it's really extraordinary because given the shock that we've been through in the past 4 years, but whatever we're doing in terms of driving engagement, driving mental health and participation at work really hasn't worked that much. In fact, it's continued to decline. We can argue that that's in part because of what has been going on. Same thing is happening in diversity. So this is a snapshot of the 250 companies that make statements around Black Lives Matter and committed to sharing their data. A small fraction of them actually did, and even fewer followed up. And 3 years later, for many folks, it feels like business as usual. The first people to be let go in the tech layoffs have been more recent hires or minoritized hires, and Black and brown voters and workers report the same type of discrimination as they always have. So things have changed on the surface, but they really haven't changed for the folks involved. Basically, for folks who work in this space and folks who research it, we kind of feel like salmons constantly swimming upstream. It's exhausting. 50% of salmons don't make it to the end. Many of them give up along the way. And it doesn't feel just that folks are swimming upriver, but it feels that the river has even gotten even more water sort of flowing back. So we can stop here and ask ourselves, why has this been so hard? So many folks, I do believe, have good intent. There's a lot of research around how you actually drive inclusion. And I think in part it is because however much the world of business has evolved, we're still pretty much building the version of the Model T, which is organizations have a particular structure. They're there for a particular reason. And basically, they're instruments to drive towards norm, which is the more homogeneity there is, the more predictability there is, the better the system works. And so we've been trying to drive inclusion of all kinds in a system that really continues to sort of norm for what is unique, what isn't, is easy to integrate. So back to the daycare analogy. I think part of this is also, business schools' responsibility. It's been difficult to talk about issues of inclusion and racism in classrooms for the same reasons. I think that it's been difficult and challenging to talk about this in corporations, which is that there are difficult conversations. There's a lot of stigma on both of these areas still. And the path of least resistance, much like companies for institutions, is to do what we've always done, which is teach what we've always done. So companies are being run by leaders who really haven't had a training in how you think about inclusion and how you think about encouraging individuals to care beyond their own well-being. Related to that is the fact that, we are still being run by leaders who pretend to be superheroes. You see it in politics, but you also see it in the workforce. They want us to be open with our vulnerability and our challenges, but for the most part, we've seen athletes coming forward, especially with mental health struggles, very few leaders. So we're still sort of being led by people who are now not only pretending to be superheroes, but also encouraging us to come forward with our vulnerability, telling us that it's going to be fine and there won't be any negative repercussions. It's a little bit difficult to trust that that will be true in this leadership context, in my opinion. The other thing I think that has happened, if we want to take some inspiration from material sciences, is that through COVID, our entire ability to deal with stress has been impaired. So when we think of mental health as the ability to deal with normal stressors in order to work fruitfully or productively and efficiently, and basically lead the lives we want to lead. So we're driving inclusion in a time when basically the amount of strain and stress that we're feeling has sort of taken a massive jump in COVID. The engineers tell us that at a certain amount of time, a material can take enough sort of stress, it can stretch and deform itself, but at some point it breaks. If we believe the numbers around burnout or people exiting the workplace, I think for many of us, our point of failure or stress has sort of evolved. Materials also along these stress strain curves respond to ambient conditions. So if I'm being stressed in a particular environment, as a material, I might have a higher elasticity than if I'm not. I think most of us feel very, very low elasticity, and there's so much sort of outside stress also coming in. The general state also of the population is anxious. Part of it is driven by politics. Politics might also be driven by the way that we present when we are under pressure. So Professor Geddes talked about climate change. I think we're living in a time of emotional climate change where the way that we're responding is also fundamentally different. People who are anxious and depressed might see things more black and white, might be more paranoid, might be more distracted. All of this makes it extremely difficult for us to care and share in environments. So that's a little bit of my best attempt at reconciling what I think has been happening on both of these fundamentally imperative tracks. Because if we don't get this right in companies, there's a lot of damage that is being done not only on the individuals that are in companies, but also on the communities that they touch. And I wanted to share this idea with our community to see if it resonates about companies as sort of organisms. In change management, there are lots of views of companies sort of as political systems or systems of living organisms. But when we think of our companies, they have sort of a genotype, which is how they're made, and then the phenotype, which is how they get expressed under pressures. Then there are mutations that occur, sort of, mergers, acquisitions, sort of transitions. And then over time, we as beings, we as leaders, we as individuals who work in academic institutions, and many of you as faculty members, sort of have evolved through natural selections of systems that have promoted certain patterns of behavior, which may be to compete, which may be to be less supportive, which may be, like in tech, to deal with, sort of take all markets. So when leaders who were trying to change our organizations, at least in my organization, I've been sort of thinking about what is essential to who it is and what it is and how it was made. Harvard Business School is certainly a very legacy environment, but what are the pressures that are sort of leading these genes to be expressed in different ways? And what is it there that I can deal with? I think one of the ways that the genes get expressed is how we choose to message our intent. And I think that especially in the area of anti-racism and also of employee well-being, the point that companies have made and leaders have made have been very muddled. In order to drive change in organization, the argument has been it has to be a business case. But in my opinion, making a business case around a moral issue is very fraught. And when you're making a business case for a moral issue and the business situation ends up, and then you wind up sort of, letting go of the folks whom you deem to be most precious, which are the individuals bringing different perspectives into your organizations, then you really wind up sort of with backfiring. So I think part of here is, companies haven't been clear about the message and the intent, and I think the more that they can be, the more that they can be more loyal to what they really want. The second thing is that there's been a lot of talk and a lot of downstream activity on both of these. And I think that fundamentally, if companies could go a little bit more upstream in terms of how are they building their organizations, what is the Model T version of this year? If we do believe that companies have been changed by the mental health crisis and COVID, then we should be looking at what are the job descriptions. Is it really credible for people to be performing their duties if they are psychologically under pressure or impaired? So we've seen a few companies sort of take a look at job descriptions very fundamentally, but also trying to think about what are the job demands and the job resources that individuals need in order to do their jobs. The workplace is a part of mental health and financial security. So it is important that we also find a way to keep people in the workplace if possible, and that can be through accommodation. The other big transition here, I think, is around not just recruiting, but also onboarding. When people come along, we sort of tell them, we want you to have accommodations and we will work with you and make it happen. But then there's very, very little concrete that happens here. So I think there's a lot of opportunity if we wanted to drive the inclusion agenda better here. And in the interest of time, I'll just go quickly through. A third point is around language. So on both of these areas, not only have we made big pronouncements, but companies haven't really been explicit about what it is that they meant by the terms that they used. So well-being might mean something very different to me than it might mean to you. I've heard a lot of people conflating sort of mental health with happiness or anti-racism with diversity. All these terms have different definitions. Some of them, like the World Health Organization, has an official definition. There is no official definition for DEI that I know of. But any company that is committed to diversity and mental health or employee well-being needs to have a working definition about what it is that they are measuring against. If not, you're really tilting like at windmills. I also think that these words, the leaders have to believe what they're saying. And looking back, when you look at some of the pronouncements around employee well-being or around diversity, if the leaders then turn around and do not live their values, then you wind up with a breach in trust with all people involved. Now, a lot of this is easy to say, very difficult to do. In academic institutions in particular, it's become really difficult to get students to engage in the classroom because people are very scared about being canceled. And so there are tools, I think, that leaders need to provide, but also equip individuals with. Some tools might be from neuroscience, which is, what actually happens in our brain when we feel that we're not being heard or disrespectful. The others might actually be tools to promote diversity of thought. It may be assigning people to have a contrary point of view. I think leaders need to constantly remind people of the beauty and importance of diversity, of thoughts, of backgrounds, of even formulation of approaches. And that, also means that leaders need to accept that there may be different points of view. I think also for all of these slides, I've provided sources and things for individuals if some of it might be of interest. I think another thing that's important also for leaders in institutions is to give us employees, students, a chance to look inward at first, which is, I may have very good intents around driving inclusion and diversity, but my intents are coming from a particular place. And the tendency for me to behave a certain way is going to be shaped not just by my genetic, but also by where I have grown up, maybe my personal experience. And so we've put together these tools to encourage, we did this for managers, but it also works for individuals, which is, one of my sort of automatic patterns of behaviors when things go a particular way. How do I behave towards people that I think might need a particular source of support? On both of these items, back to my daughter at daycare, there's a lot of good words around. I want to be supportive to my colleague. I want to have a very diverse workforce. But when it comes to my taking on the work of somebody who might be out on mental health leave, or my giving up some airtime in a meeting where I'm used to being the one speaking is really, really difficult. And so, the Work in America survey has a vast majority of us really wanting to be respected at work, really wanting to support mental health. I think the work of the leaders and the work of academic institutions at this juncture is to remind us all that this being heard means that you have to make space for others to be heard. Being respected means that you have to respect others. Wishing to have psychological safety at work means that you have to be willing to hear things that you don't want to hear. Another idea that I wanted to share that is a little bit less orthodox, which is it's very difficult for us to drive inclusion and to be supported when we're stressed. And we've developed a tool around sort of noticing what stresses you, but also being aware of your cause of stress on others. And so the link will take you to a website. And I will close out here because I want to have a little bit of time for interaction. Basically, I think we've tried to be really expedient on both of these fundamentally crucial topics of our time since 2020. And now we're seeing a backlash coming. We've seen the backlash coming in DI. It's a heartache. We're going to see the same backlash coming on employee well-being with people saying we're calling people too much. So the same sort of playbook has led to the same outcome, which is why, I think it's a good idea to sort of step back and think about, this work is not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's going to be a way of life. One of the slides that I skipped over is the fact that, a third of our young people identifying as multiracial, and 44% of our young people, have a diagnosis or experience depression and anxiety on a regular basis. Our workforce has fundamentally changed. And so there's going to be no shortcut here. This is really going to be a requirement to really change how we build organizations. Another important topic, I think, is the fact that, companies cannot control social issues. And I think in some ways, business leaders in this hubris have taken on more than they can and maybe more than they should. So instead of focusing on giving people, living wages, providing important benefits like sleep apps, there's no good mental health without, good sleep, supporting pregnant persons, providing, good elder care, good daycare, all these things that the research shows really makes a difference in mental well-being. There are a lot of things that companies cannot do, but they can influence the people who do, who are, for example, politicians and elected officials, but also support key constituencies like teachers. So when you read about young people, when they are distraught, they will go to their teachers. I think 81% of students who do seek mental health support go to their teachers. So there's some key constituents here that I think companies could be supporting in order to help the future generation. And then the rest we have discussed. This is the stats about the future. And in closing, this is 1961-62, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the beginning, sort of the germs of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Only with the unity based on respect of the full human dignity will be how we will really, I think, accommodate this fundamental change that we're seeing in society, and the dual imperative to drive diversity and inclusion of all kinds in in the workplace. I thank you for your time. I'm sorry about the rush. It's an honor to be here, and I hope that you will challenge me on some of these ideas and share what you've learned. Thank you so much.